name is Sean from Sean's Wild World, and we are here with Zack Rago. I'm always going to mess
It's alright, that's how it
goes. From documentary Chasing Coral, and he's here because I wanted to interview him and ask him a few questions about what he's done and like the research. And so, without further ado, first, like if you would like to introduce yourself, you can.
Yeah, I'm Zack Rago. I'm from the film Chasing Coral, where essentially I went on this big adventure to document coral bleaching around the world, which is a super interesting phenomenon that not a lot of people have heard of or had the opportunity to explore. So it was a really fulfilling project, and we did a lot of good with it, I think, in exposing some of these underwater issues that are largely out of sight and out of mind. So it's been pretty cool, and I'm happy to be here to chat.
Well, the first question we have is discuss how you got part in the Chasing Coral project and how you got connected to it.
Yes, Chasing Coral was kind of a right place, right time type of thing for me. I was working for a company called View Into the Blue that ultimately makes underwater imagery equipment and data acquisition equipment. But what makes our stuff special is like a self-cleaning technology. So it's a magnetic arm that moves around a camera housing and keeps it clean. That actually solves a problem for doing time-lapse, which is what the crew at Chasing Coral was looking at, and they reached out to us and we developed this system for them to actually go out in the water and hopefully take time lapses of this kind of very elusive event called coral bleaching. And in doing that, I ended up getting to go in the field a great deal with them. I was just a kid that was there to put his equipment in the water, and for whatever reason that kind of spiraled into me becoming one of the more common faces in the film, and being kind of an emotional vessel for people throughout this entire experience of a coral bleaching event. So definitely not what I signed up for, but a crazy experience that was worthwhile for sure.
For those who don't know, what is a coral?
Yeah, so corals are very interesting. I think that's really why I got involved with them in the first place. Is they're extremely unique when you look at them amongst a lot of the other things that maybe we label as animals. They have a very unique relationship with the plant. So they have zooxanthellae, or small algae cells, that live inside of their tissues, that actually physically live inside of their cell. And those algae photosynthesize, and it produces the food and the energy that the coral needs to grow. The name of the game for corals is to constantly grow and compete for space. They're growing upwards and outwards in order to compete for light, because they have to photosynthesize and they're constantly building. And it's that foundational structure and energy and productivity that creates the basis of one of the more diverse ecosystems on the planet. So it's a very unique world. It's pretty cool how a very simple organism, yet sophisticated physiologically, can be this incredible foundation for so much life on the planet. So they're very simple. They don't move around, but they play a big role on our planet. So they're pretty cool.
Well, you mentioned bleaching. What exactly is bleaching, and why does it happen?
Yeah, so as cool and sophisticated as that coral physiology may be, they do kind of have a flaw, so to speak, in that these algae can't necessarily deal with heat like the corals can, or like other organisms may be able to do. That photosynthetic property that they have begins to break down. They're no longer producing energy. They're producing very volatile molecules and compounds that ultimately are harming the coral internally. And so the corals essentially use what we call bleaching as a survival mechanism. It's kind of a great evolutionary feat, in my opinion, in the sense that the corals would die if they didn't bleach. Their cells would be devoured from the inside out by these compounds that the algae is producing, so they spit them out. They get rid of them completely, and they leave behind their transparent tissue. So corals are very colorful. That's what we think of when we think of coral reefs, but that color comes from the algae. So when they spit it out, they leave behind nothing but white corals, skeletons. And that can actually lead to death eventually. They've also removed their energy source, right? So give them a month or so, and they no longer can actually produce what they need, and they begin to perish, and that's how you get mass mortality, which has been happening very frequently over the past few years. So it's a very serious thing. It's happening around the world, but there's a lot more awareness about it today than there ever has been. So it's a battle that's worth fighting, but it's a very daunting task as well.
In that you mentioned that like the mass mortality, is bleaching a immediate that like as soon as the coral starts bleaching, is that like you know that it's not going to be able to make it, or is it?
Yeah, so every species is a little different for sure. So there's some species that may essentially just be doomed from the get-go because they just don't cope well. And there are others that can make it through maybe a minor bleaching event and be completely fine. But when they're bleached, the coral itself is still alive, so it's not dead yet. In fact, if the temperature comes down in a week or two, that coral can then regain those algal symbionts and become colorful again and survive. If it waits too long, then that tissue will begin to kind of slough off, and they'll die and leave behind their skeletons, which will then get just turned into, covered in algae and have kind of what we call a phase shift.
What makes, sorry, I just saw this question, I forgot what it was. What makes coral bleaching so big a problem in coral reefs? Like, why is that such a big effect on like the environmental world?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is something that's not happening just on the Great Barrier Reef or just on your local reef, wherever you may be. It's something that's been happening at this global scale as of lately. So during large El Nino years, we're now seeing mass bleaching globally. And that's pretty problematic. So corals are the nurseries of our oceans. Some estimates put 30% of all marine life spend at least some point in time during their life cycle on a coral reef. So if you continue to, just bash them with these heat stressors and continue to see mortality rates like this, you're also removing these habitats from a huge portion of the global ecology. The ocean's 70% of this planet, and when you remove a huge nursery for that 70%, it has impacts across the board, particularly in the oceans, but eventually it makes its way back to us. At a global side, it's pretty scary to see coral reefs go away because there are many communities around the world that make their homes on the coasts, and some of which have coral reefs right out their back door, and that's their economy. That's how they put food in their mouths, and it can be really scary to remove that from a human system as well, because then they've lost their biggest resource. So corals all around, both ecologically as well as from the human side of things, are really important pieces to how we live our lives. So we gotta do our best for sure.
Beyond bleaching, what are some other big problems facing coral reefs around the world?
Yeah, so I think going back to that last question, it's a lot of it becomes localized stressors as well. So a lot of those communities that do live right on the reefs, more often than not, they can be fairly underdeveloped areas of the world, and they might not have the best sewage systems, for instance, or the best fishing practices, and they can kind of get in the way of the health of the coral reef as well. So things like nutrient runoff and that sewage runoff can have really dramatic impacts on a coral reef. Overfishing is, again, just like you said, with a kind of collapse of an ecosystem. You're just going the other way. You're starting at the top and moving down instead of destroying the coral and moving your way up. It has impacts on the reef itself by removing the big fish. You start to get an imbalance in the system. But there are also other big things like ocean acidification and plastic pollution, for instance. All these things are kind of on the shoulders of our oceans, and we need to battle each and every single one of them, which is a pretty daunting challenge, but something that I think is worth our time to be focusing on and pursuing. But there are many. There's a lot of pressures right now, unfortunately, but there's also a lot of innovation and creativity going around to try and fix these issues, which is also really exciting.
One big topic in ocean conservation is MPAs, or marine protected areas. Can you explain what they are and like how they are meant to like help in different ways? Yeah,
absolutely. So marine protected area or national monument, or however we really decide to do it, is really just designating particular areas, especially with incredible ecosystems or very important ecosystems to their surroundings, and giving them the protection needed to make them sustainable for the future. So not allowing those overfishing issues to impact those types of places, and mitigating all of those localized stressors as the best that we can, so that really you only leave things like heat. You can't necessarily protect them from the heat, unfortunately, but by protecting them at a federal level like this, we can at least eliminate the other stressors, the localized stressors. So they're obviously incredibly important. Right now there's a lot of kind of political debate about, a little push and pull for how we move forward with the parks that we already have, or new ones that we want into the future. So it's a hot topic at the moment, but they're incredibly successful, and they're definitely a pivotal piece to us kind of solving the problem, or at least buying us a little bit of time, or buying those places a little bit of time.
Let's see. Oh, okay. What were some of the ecological collapse symptoms that you were able to see while doing the daily dives in Lizard Island?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the biggest one is going to be that, foundational shift or phase shift that we see right off the bat. So you go from an ecosystem with 80 to 100% coral coverage, and a few months later, or a few weeks later even, you end up with what we call an algal turf, where algae is now dominating the ecosystem rather than the corals. And that algae is growing on top of the corals. So you completely changed the foundation of who's living there. So things that need corals no longer have that opportunity to even exist in that ecosystem, because either their colonies that they're affiliated with are gone, or they just simply don't have the resources. So you lose a great deal of diversity, and then you obviously have kind of like an herbivorous victory. You get all of those animals kind of have this successful period where it's like a giant fiesta, an unlimited food supply. And then it comes back and kind of finds that equilibrium, but in that direct, immediate aftermath, it becomes a very mucky and algae-covered, fuzzy place.
What are some signs that you know of, like healthy coral reef areas? Sort of like something that if you see, you're like, okay, this is at least in some way doing well.
Totally. There's a lot of coral reefs up in even the far north Great Barrier Reef, which is kind of the epicenter of the 2016 bleaching, in which, when I went back, found some locations that were absolutely remarkable. Looked like 1975, and I'm sitting down there with all my colleagues. It's mind-blowing why this even exists, because it shouldn't. But that's really where the hope lies in marine biology right now, is that it's a very dynamic system. The ocean's big, and they reproduce in such a manner that they can kind of provide for places around them that might not be that lucky, because there are plenty of reefs that are extremely damaged, but it's those little gems here and there that almost act as seed banks for the places around them that may not have been so lucky. So there is definitely hope, and we're already seeing recruitment or baby corals around the world, and we just kind of have to do our best to protect the really incredible spots while we can, or as long as we can, and use them as our insurance policies for the rest moving forward.
So last question is, as we get closer to summer break, what are some tips you give to viewers that may be heading to tropical destinations where there aren't reefs?
Yeah, absolutely. My number one thing, just get in the water. That's how I got involved in the ocean and how I fell in love, and I think anyone that has the opportunity, which not a lot of people do, to go see this ecosystem, find it to just be pure magic. It's a totally alien world. It's unlike anything else that you can see terrestrially, and it's very difficult not to fall in love with it. And when you fall in love with something, you want to protect it. And so we just got to get people in the water. That's the most important thing, is just get out there and experience it. It's a really lovely place, and I think most people find it pretty special to experience. So yeah, throw a mask on and go enjoy yourself.
And what would you say to someone who doesn't live in the ocean and still wants to try and help in any way possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can think of it ocean-oriented, or you can just do your best in your own neck of the woods. I mean, growing up here in Colorado, where we're at right now, that's a place that we're pretty damn far from the ocean, and you can definitely focus on things like rivers if you wanted to. It's an ongoing thing that the ocean starts at your front door. What you put in the rivers here in Colorado, or in Montana, or Idaho, or Missouri or wherever you may be from, that water ends up in the ocean no matter what. So, less pollution, less plastics, all the easy things, but I think more than anything it's about finding your local ecosystem and being a participant in your own neck of the woods and protecting it that way. What a lot of people don't know is I'm biased, so I tell you, coral reefs are the most threatened ecosystem on the planet, but you could make a realistic argument for grasslands. The diversity loss in grasslands over the past half century has been astronomical, and so that's the majority of the U.S., and most people have no real understanding of that type of degradation. So there are definitely organizations that you can get out there and become involved with your own little neck of nature wherever you are, or whatever it is that you are passionate about or connected to.
Well, thank you again for doing the interview. If you guys have not seen it yet, I definitely recommend watching the documentary Chasing Coral. It's on Netflix. It's beyond amazing. I don't know what else, but I definitely recommend it. It's great. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and please like, subscribe, and share this because it's really cool. So I'll see you later.
Thanks.